Yo, what's good? Big Z here, and today I'm going to show you guys my mastering process. So here's what the track sounded like before it was mastered. And here's what it sounds like after I mastered it. So if I'm mastering my own track, I'll make all the changes really in the mix, and then for mastering, I'll just do some light multiband compression and add a limiter to get it up to commercial loudness. But when I'm mastering someone else's track, there's a lot more that I do. And my mastering process isn't normal at all because I master almost all electronic dance music. So what I ask for instead of just one unmastered file is I'll ask for an unmastered file with the entire track without the kick, and then I'll ask for a file of just the kick. So what you're seeing here in front of me is an artist named Mike Plain's track. The track is called Tell You, and he sent me his entire track up here that has just all the instruments, drums, and everything, just everything except the kick. And then down here I have the kick, which usually is just one file, but he split it up into two layers that he had. So he has the low kick and I guess the high kick here. So that means my mastering process actually involves a tiny bit of mixing, which is kind of cheating, but the kick is the most important part in dance music. So I definitely like to get the kick separately so I can process it separately and mix it in on its own. And it just saves me a lot of headaches with the master having the kick separated. Anyway, the first thing I always do is just listen to the entire track. So let's check it out. So normally I'd listen to the full thing, but I'll just stop it there because you guys get the gist of the track. So the first thing I'll do is get the BPM locked in. So I'm going to put this BPM meter on the kick. So it's 126 BPM. I'm just going to make sure that kick lines up with the grid the right way. Yep, so it's right on the grid. So there's nothing else I need to do to get it on time. So I'm going to take this plugin off. So mastering is all about getting the right tonal balance to the track and then just increasing the loudness so it can compete with other commercial tracks. So on the first listen of this track, I kind of felt like it was lacking some serious transients in the drop to make those chords pop a little bit more. And also another big thing I noticed was the verses seemed a lot louder than the drops, which I'll definitely fix later. But first, I want to loop the drop section because I want to focus on that part first. So you would think this would be one of the last things you would do, but the first thing I'm going to do is actually add a limiter and increase the loudness a little bit. And that's because that amplifies some of the problems with the mix. So I'm going to take this limiter, Fab Filters Pro L, and just increase the volume until it gets to a competitive level, just so I can hear what kind of issues are really going on. So I'm going to take out my multimeter and I'm just going to loop the drop section and get it up to like maybe -10 RMS. And then after that, I'll do all my work balancing the different EQs and the tonal work, and then I'll go back to the limiter and push it a little bit harder. Alright, so that'll be better to work with for now. So now I'm really hearing those transients are lacking in the drop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Waves Trans X Multi, which is a multiband transient designer, and it just increases the attack of different transients. So you'll be able to see what it does right here. I'm going to increase the sensitivity until it's really grabbing those transients that I want. So it seems to work pretty well all the way up at 10 sensitivity. And I like the multiband transient designer better than just a normal transient designer, because you'll see it doesn't need to boost the low frequencies to pull out these transients. It's only really boosting the mid and high frequencies. And just to see what it's doing, I'll usually increase the range a lot and then bring it back down to a normal level where I feel like it sounds right. So that's already making a huge difference to me. So without the transient designer, and with it. So another thing I'm hearing with that bell lead is a lot of really high resonant frequencies that are annoying, and a perfect plugin to get rid of those is called Soothe by OEK Sound. So I'll go into that plugin right here. And it actually has this awesome preset called Ear Friendly Top on Master. So what I'm going to do is just mess around with this until I can kind of tame those bell frequencies a little bit. So I'm going to want it to start around like 4,000 hertz. And let's just check out what it does. We'll make it more drastic at first and then pull it back. And then I'll use the dry wet knob just to see how much I want that mixed in. So a bad side effect of using this plugin is it's going to lose a lot of that good high end that you want in there, but it also is taking out the resonant frequencies. So I'm still going to use it and just add more high frequencies in back later in the chain. So I think that sounds fine for now. I can adjust it more later or decrease how much it's affecting the track later. So now I'm going to listen back and see what else I want to change. Alright, so I'm going to start EQing and messing with the tonal balance a little bit. So I'm going to add an EQ after the multiband transient designer. And for this one, I'm going to use FabFilter Pro Q3. And to me, it sounds like the sub is a little too loud. So I'm going to turn the sub frequencies down a little bit. That sounds like a little better balance to me. Later on, when I'm using my reference track and referencing it back and forth, I could change that a little bit if it needs to be changed. So for now, that's good. I think it needs a little more presence too. That's kind of bringing up some of the frequencies that Soothe is canceling out. So another thing I need to do is bring up that very high end a little bit more. So to do that, I'm going to use a multiband compressor. So I'm going to use FabFilter Pro MB for this. And I just like to do this because it kind of tames the frequencies a little bit and boosts them at the same time. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to go from like 4,000 hertz and up. So once it's compressing the frequencies a little bit, I'm going to boost it with the output level. And that just added a lot of clarity to the whole mix, bringing up the high end like that, because I lost some of the high end with that Soothe plugin. So I kind of feel like there's a major resonant frequency in the mix as well. So I'm going to add another EQ plugin. I generally just like to add another instance of an EQ if it's kind of in the same area as some EQ boost or cut I've already made. It's just easier for me to do it that way instead of just doing it all in one EQ. So I'm going to find this resonant frequency that's sitting somewhere in the high end up here. Alright, so I think I found it. It's right around 4,500 hertz. So let's see what happens when I reduce this frequency, and then I'll bring it down a lot and then kind of mix it back in until it feels right. So I know 6 dBs is a really drastic EQ cut for a master, but I feel like this might need it. There's just a really harsh frequency right there that I definitely want to get rid of. Now bell sounds are really tricky because there's so many resonant frequencies. Like I'm hearing some more resonant frequencies around like the low mid range that are kind of popping out to me too. So I might use another instance of Soothe and just see if it sounds any better taming those mid frequencies of the bell. I can always experiment, and if I don't like it, I'll just take it off. So let's see what that does. If I add another instance of Soothe, and this time I'll just do kind of the range down here. So I'm going to move all these over. Just do around this range. And I'll see what I can do to those bells. So I'm going to make it really extreme at first and then mix it back in. So this is working well. You'll notice it's really only getting rid of those bell frequencies because it's just like one frequency at a time that's dipping a lot down here. Everything else is pretty much staying at a normal level, if you can check out the graph here. So I'm going to leave that on there for now. I could always change it when I'm referencing later. So let's turn all the plugins off that I just worked with and just see what the difference sounds like. So here's before all the plugins. And after. Just really helping to tame those harsh bell frequencies. So now what I'm going to do is start referencing the track a little bit. So I'm going to use adapter metric AB, and the reference track that the artist Mike Plain sent me to use for this track was So What by Jay Pryor. So now I've got the reference loaded in here. I'm going to loop the drop and just match the volumes. I want the part of the drop where the full drums are playing with the hi-hats too, and not just the kick like this section. Because then I can't reference how the clap and the hi-hats are sounding. Sometimes the volume match doesn't exactly get it where I want it, but I think -4 dB is good for now. So I'm going to move that over here so I can continue referencing with that track. So I haven't touched the kick at all. So that's what I'm going to get into now. So I'm just going to use an EQ to see what's going on with these kick layers and make sure there's not any interference. So I'll put one on the low kick, then I'll put one on the high kick, and let's see what happens. Alright, so that's definitely not good. Both the kicks have sub-frequencies. So on the high kick, I'm definitely going to want to get rid of those sub-frequencies. I can't have two layers that are hitting at the same time with those sub-frequencies. It'll just make the whole mix sound really muddy. So I'm going to get rid of the sub-frequencies on the top kick. So now the kick is really lacking those sub-frequencies because he was obviously mixing with both these kicks going. So what I'm going to do is just boost the sub-frequencies on the other kick to make up for that. So that's sounding better to me. Now I'm going to reference the track back and forth and see what else I can do. So those transients are really powerful in the Jay Pryor track. So I'm just going to go back to my transient designer and see what happens if I bring it up some more. I don't want to overdo it though, but I'll see what happens. I might also deactivate these lower layers just so they're completely bypassed. So those transients just add a lot more power to the track. Let's check out the tonal balance with some referencing. So I have this EQ after my metric AB plugin. So what I'm going to do is just isolate certain frequencies. Like I'm going to start at the sub frequencies and then just compare it back and forth with the reference track. So the sub-frequencies seem very similar, so I'm just going to move on to the next section. So I'm going to do like maybe 150 to 400 hertz. Check out the low mids. it seems like the reference track's kick is a lot more powerful in this section. So a good way to increase the punch of your kick is also use a multiband transient designer and just really zone it in on one specific area. So I'm going to turn these other bands off. I'm going to increase the attack, and then I'm just going to zone in and try to isolate a certain frequency that I want to be boosted, or a certain frequency range. So you can see that frequency makes it really punchy. I'm obviously not going to use it this drastically, but here's the difference. So that's what it's going to be doing at a much quieter level. So I'm going to bring it down. That just adds a lot more punch to the kick, in my opinion. So let's move on to the next frequency range, which I usually do from like 1100 to 400 hertz. And you'll see it clipping over here. That's just because I have this EQ plugin on after the limiter. That's why it's clipping for now, but that won't be an issue later. But you'll see these bell frequencies are still really resonant and really high up there. I want to go back to this Soothe plugin that was controlling the low mids and just maybe try to clean this up a little bit. So you'll see when I move the Soothe plugin all the way up, down here on the EQ, those bell sounds are just completely gone. Alright, now it seems like the EQ of that section is kind of similar to the reference track, so I think that's good. So I'm going to move on to the next section from 4,000 down to 1,000 hertz. So it sounds like it needs more presence in this area, so I might go back to this EQ and just boost it a little bit higher. I think that's fine for that section. It's a different type of lead sound in the reference track, so I don't want to match it exactly because it might make those bell sounds overpowering. So now I'm just going to check the high end real quick. So I'm just going to move this all the way up and go from 4,000 up. So I'm going to want to tame those super high frequencies, and I might do that with a multiband compressor, which is one of the last things I do. So what I'm going to do is turn this EQ off and then add a Waves multiband compressor that I like called Waves Linear Multiband. And I like this certain setting on here, multi-electro mastering. And what I'm going to do is just lightly compress each frequency range. And I think this is better than just using a compressor that compresses all frequencies the same, because it'll just kind of zone in on the areas that need compressing at that certain point in time and just reduce them a little bit. So I feel like you get a better overall balance. So anyway, I'm going to dip each of these bands down until they're compressing those frequencies a little bit, and then I can really dial in how I want them. So I'll show you what I mean. going to look for like 1 to 3 decibels of compression over here on this graph. Alright, now I'll bypass this plugin and put it back on, and bypass it and put it back on, just so I could hear the difference. So I think that's doing a good job. One thing I might change is the very high end, maybe this top section, just reduce it a little bit more, so I can match what was going on here with the J prior track, because there were some super high frequencies. So you can see this multiband compressor is doing a nice job of just taming those frequencies. So now I'm almost finished. So what I'm going to want to do is throw an EQ on here, and the only reason for that would be to add one more band. I'm going to add a low cut filter, and I'm going to change it to side mode. So what this does is just make everything below, I usually do like 150 hertz mono. So you don't have to worry about any stereo artifacts below 150 hertz. And that's all I'm doing with that plugin. Now the last step will be to bring it up to commercial loudness. So on the referencing plugin, I'm going to move J Prior's track up to where it was mastered at. So now I'm going to go back and just compare the loudness, and also use this multimeter to get the loudness up to where I want it to be. So I usually look for around like -7 RMS. I feel like that's a pretty good level. Some tracks go a little higher and some go a little lower, but I always try to be right around there. So I have this limiter already on here. So what I'm going to do is actually put on a different limiter before it. I find using 2 different limiters in a row sometimes can take the workload off one limiter and just help it get that loudness without too much compression or distortion. So I'm going to use Waves L2 right here and just add a little bit more limiting. It's up here. My Waves plugins are messed up for some reason. Alright, so here's the Waves L2. I'm going to turn dithering off because I'm going to do that with the other limiter that's after that. So I'm just going to increase this limiter threshold until I'm getting around -7 RMS. Now I'm going to compare that with the loudness of the J Prior track. Alright, so that sounds like they're at a similar level to me. I think that's a good overall level for this master. There's still a little bit of harsh frequencies in the bells, but it's just an artifact of that sound he used. So I'm going to leave that for now. Alright, so now the drop section is completely mastered, but I still haven't looked at the verses. So I'm going to see how all these plugins are affecting the verses. I'm also going to move it down in volume because I feel like the verses were way too loud. So let's see what happens. Usually I'll automate the dry-wet signals of these plugins I have on, and just keep them on the drop and take them away on the verses. But other times the plugins will actually help on the verses too. So we'll see what happens. Right now, if I listen to the verse, it's way too loud compared to the drop. So what I'm going to do is put a gain plugin after all these other plugins on the instrumental. And I'm also going to do it for the kick. It looks like the top kick is only in the drop, so I don't have to worry about that. So what I'm going to do is just add a gain plugin to the kick as well. And I'm going to see how much I need to reduce the verses by. So let me get in here, go to the gain automation on both these tracks. This one doesn't really matter where I put it. I feel like I need it to be pretty drastic for this track, just because the verses are so much louder than the drop. Four dBs actually sounds good. I'm just going to get this kick down a little bit too. Alright, that sounds good to me. Now I'm going to do the same thing in the second verse. I'm going to move the kick down 1.9. I'm going to move the instrumental down 4 dBs. You can see it right here, just how much thicker the waveform is in the verse sections than the drop. That shouldn't really be the case, but I can fix it with this gain automation pretty easily. Alright, so now I'm going to see how the plugins I've put on are affecting the verse. So what I'm going to do is turn them all off and slowly add them back in. So it got less dull immediately, so I know I want to keep this multiband compressor that's adding the high end. And I feel like the bass is a little overpowering too, so I'm going to keep this EQ here. So for this EQ, I'm going to automate this band up and down for the drop. So what I'm going to do is, it's band 3, so I'm going to go into the automation. It is the second EQ in the chain, and it's band 3. I'm going to go to the gain, and I'm just going to make it at 0 dBs for the verses. Let's see. And back down at 6 dBs down for the drop. So I don't need to be as exact with this automation. Alright. So now you'll see if I open the EQ during the verses, nothing's happening with the EQ. During the drop, it's going down 6 decibels. Now I'm going to see what the Multiband, Transient Designer, and the Soothe plugins do to the verse, and see if I need to automate them the same way. I actually like that Multiband Transient Designer on there. I think I'm going to keep it because it really just brings out some nice transients in the verse as well. So let's check out these plugins. like those soothe plugins are helping the verses a lot, so I'm just going to leave those on there too. So now what I would normally do is just listen to the whole thing back, maybe take a break from it and come back and check it with the reference track again. But you guys got the full gist of my mastering process now, so I think it's completely finished. So now again, I'll show you what it sounded like before mastering. And here's what it sounds like after I mastered it. So one last thing I'll do is show you how I export it. So I'm going to turn off everything after the limiters because I was just using that to reference. So now I'm going to open this limiter. I'm going to turn dithering on to 24 bits because I want the limiter to do the dithering. And then I'm going to bounce the whole track. So I'm going to see where it starts. It starts right there. I'm going to see if I need to end it any earlier. Alright, so I'm going to end it right here. Now I'm going to bounce it, Command B. And then I want to bounce it as a wave file, 24-bit, because I'm also dithering in 24 bits. I'm going to turn dithering off because the limiter is already doing that. I'm going to make the sample rate 44.1 and turn normalize off for sure. You don't need overload protection on because the limiter should be doing that for you. And I think that's good to go. So I'm just going to go ahead and bounce this. So normally I don't do this much processing on a master. This track just happened to need it to help it out a little bit. I mean, like I said, with my own tracks, I'll usually make all those changes in the mix with the instrument tracks themselves. Like if I needed more transients on those leads, I'll just add them right on the lead channel. But if I'm mastering other people's tracks, I obviously don't have that option. So I'll do all the changes right there on the master channel or that track channel. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. Make sure to follow me on Instagram and Spotify below. And other than that, I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.